Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 15 of Weekend Warriors, the review series for the sports cars of various different subcategories on GranTurismo 6. You've got some typical sports cars in the way that you'd usually think of: 2 doors, 2 seats, probably a rag top or an electronic folding tin top, but some which are perhaps less obvious, like larger sports coupes, or even some modern muscle cars like the Camaros, Challengers, etc. And in this particular pick we are going to the more luxury segment of the sports car class, in a similar way to vehicles like Mercedes, Aston Martin, etc., which have vehicles in this class. This is a more upmarket approach to a sports car, but crucially in the case of this car, without the success. Because although this vehicle did sell, it's not considered to be a particularly amazing car. In fact, some people, such as Top Gear for instance, consider it to be specifically a not very good car. And the car is the Lexus SC430. A car which, on paper at least, doesn't sound like a bad deal at all. But in practice, there's just something about it which people don't seem to click with. Now, as far as what you get from this car, because there are probably still quite a few people who just don't own the car, it's the kind of vehicle which you could very easily just pass straight over in the dealership and not really notice it. But for those who haven't bought it, you're looking at a price tag of 60 grand. So, a fair amount, but again, for a sports car, not too bad. The engine is a pretty decent size. It's a 4.3 litre. You can supercharge that engine up to 591 horsepower, and that's actually pretty impressive. I'm glad that they allowed us to do that, because as we've mentioned before, and as undoubtedly we'll mention again, there are a number of vehicles on the game, especially in fact in the sports car class, which are not allowed to have the power that they deserve. Sometimes they're not allowed a supercharger or a turbo. And that just really feels like it neuters those cars compared to how quick they should be. This vehicle is allowed to deliver the power, at least for the most part, that it should have. You could get even more power out of the engine in reality, but 591 horsepower is quite a lot. That's roughly the same as a GT3 car. And even though the power is good, the torque is even better, because this car puts out 629 foot-pounds of it. And that makes this car technically something of a sleeper. And Lexus is actually a very good company for making sleeper cars. Now, this is not as much of a sleeper as, I would say, the SC300, or definitely the GS300, but it's still, I would say, a sleeper nonetheless, because people don't expect this car to be anything, really. Most people don't even give this car a second thought. Now, as far as weight, it is a luxury sports car, so it is a little heavier than some. You're looking at a similar kind of weight range to something like a Chrysler 300C with the full weight loss package, and that's just over 1,380 kilos. So it's not ridiculously heavy, but it's pretty heavy nonetheless. As far as horsepower per tonne, well, it does suffer a little due to that extra weight, but 426 isn't awful. Not particularly amazing, but not bad. The PP, I would say, is really good on this car, and that is predominantly due to, I think, that weight. The weight really does bring the PP much lower than it could and arguably should be at 555. So that's roughly the same as something like a Mitsubishi Evo of the older generations, and some other vehicles like that, which you wouldn't typically think of putting this car up against. But although you wouldn't typically think of it as an opponent for those cars, under certain conditions, this can actually be a very, very useful car. And one of the reasons for that is its straight line speed. Because although this car is certainly not bad around corners, it's actually a lot better than you'd probably expect. By far this car's best point is the straight line speed. For 591 horsepower, you get huge performance. The top speed is around or even over 250 miles per hour under its own power. With NOS, and of course with Slipstream, it can go even further. So, for 555 PP, that's a very fast car. among the best, in fact, that you can get at that level, especially in terms of bigger, heavier, luxury cars. So for 60 grand, although it's not necessarily the most loved of sports vehicles, it's starting to look actually like a much better deal than people give it credit for. And I actually do think that on Gran Turismo 6, this car is a good deal. It's not necessarily the most affordable of cars at 60 grand, of course not, but what it does offer you for that price is, I would say, really good. A lot better than you'd think, and a lot better than its on-paper spec would suggest. Because at the end of the day, 591 horsepower certainly isn't bad, but at the same time it's not really breaking the bank as far as power goes. There are plenty of other cars in this series with more power than that. But what this car does with that power is pretty impressive. And Lexus has a good name on Gran Turismo for having really outstanding top speeds from their sleeper cars, and for good reason. They are really, really quick. Now, as I mentioned, the handling is better than you'd probably assume. The car, I would say, handles itself better than its weight would suggest. Less weight, of course, wouldn't be a bad thing, but as it is, that's as low as we can go, and the car does handle better than a nearly 1400 kilo car, especially with almost 600 horsepower, should be able to handle. So overall, there are quite a few people who haven't tried this vehicle, and if you are one of those people, especially if you're into sleeper cars or just need a car with outstandingly high top speed in particular for a relatively low PP, for tracks like the Le Mans for instance, or Special Stage Route 7, tracks where you need that speed but also handling as well, this car really offers both of those things in good quantities. So overall, that's it for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.